Well, to discuss the stakes for Joe Biden in Michigan, I'm pleased to be joined now by Thomas Gift. He's the director of the Centre of US Politics at UCL University in London. Good afternoon to you, sir. Pleased you could join us today.
It's great to be with you. Thanks.
How concerned do you think the Biden team are today about Arab American voters not turning out for them?
Well, it's certainly a concern for the general election. I think that it's less of a concern for the primaries. I mean, Joe Biden essentially has the primaries locked up. So most of what we're seeing here is symbolic. You know, the campaign is aiming to secure over 10,000 uncommitted votes, which does mirror that narrow margin by which former President Trump carried the state in 2016. But it's noteworthy that in the 2020 election, President Biden won Michigan with a significant lead of over 150,000 votes. So I'm not sure if this is going to make an enormous difference. But if you go state by state, all of these battlegrounds are going to most likely be determined by such a slim margin. Any demographic could tip the scales. And so Joe Biden has to take this seriously.
Indeed. And, you mentioned the stats from the last election, which indeed Biden did win Michigan. But the election before, back in 2016, Donald Trump won it by just 10,000 votes. And it's worth saying, as we saw in that report, Michigan has a high Arab American population. It also has a significant Jewish population, and it has a significant number of young, relatively progressive voters. So it is a key swing state in that sense. What do you think the Republican campaign in Michigan looks like?
Well, that's a great question. I think a lot of it will hinge on young voters. I mean, this is a demographic that typically leans progressive, but oftentimes cannot reliably show up to the polls. Right? Democrats often say that they can make a big difference, rock the vote, and so on. And the question is whether they're going to show up or not. And so, I think for Republicans, if they can either even sort of take just a fraction of those young voters or keep them home, I think that would be considered a win for them. But I think Michigan, just more broadly, it's kind of a Rust Belt state. It has significant manufacturing, post-industrial economy. And so I think Donald Trump really speaks to those voters who feel like they've been left behind by globalization and automation and trade and just the gutting of the U.S. economy generally.
Beyond Michigan, how big an issue do you think the war in Gaza is going to be among American voters in the primaries now and perhaps also in November?
Well, when you think about this war, I think that you can almost compare it to any policy issue. I don't think that this is going to be the most salient thing in this election. Really, this election is going to be a battle of personalities. When we look 10, 11 months out, both of these candidates are such known quantities and they're so different. And I think Americans have largely made up their mind on whether they like Donald Trump or Joe Biden. I'm not sure if anything is going to tip the scales. I really feel like we're almost in this scenario of kind of post-persuasion politics where there's not a whole lot of convincing. So it's mostly going to be about mobilization and base mobilization. And so, to that extent, some of the sort of electorates that would be most invested in this war, they still constitute relatively small fractions of their overall constituencies. But as we said before, even 1 or 2 percentage points in Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin and Florida and other swing states could make a big difference.
And just finally, next Tuesday will be Super Tuesday. What should we be looking out for then?
Well, I think the Republican nomination is sewn up at this point. Nikki Haley has vowed to stay in the race, but it's over. Donald Trump has won the first 4 primaries, and so it's more just a question of when, not if, Haley is going to drop out. I expect that Donald Trump is going to win some of these Super Tuesday states by even larger margins than he has in South Carolina and New Hampshire and Iowa. And in all of those places, they were big victories for Donald Trump. So he's been framing himself as the inevitable nominee since the very outset. He's been right about that. There's been no serious challenge to his dominance. And so I feel like after Super Tuesday, he's really going to pivot to the general election because he will have essentially obtain the nomination. And that's where we start to see Biden and Donald Trump really locking heads.
Thomas Gift, it's good to talk to you, sir. Thanks very much.
Thank you.